Okay, well, welcome everyone. Good evening. Thank you for joining us at 7:30, which I know is probably getting towards everyone's end of day. But tonight I'm very excited to welcome you to our last in this year's mental health series, webinar series. And this one is a session specifically for coaches on how to prepare your athletes for provincial championships. We ask every year about topics that people want us to provide information and resources about, and performance anxiety and handling performance under pressure are always two topics that are number one in that request. So we're super excited to share them with you this evening. My name is Emma Gibbons, and I'm the CEO of Volleyball BC. And I would like to open this session by first of all saying that I am very grateful that we are coming to you, or I am coming to you today from the traditional unceded territories of the Tsleil-Waututh, the Musqueam, and the Squamish First Nation. And we are very privileged to have our head offices here down in Burnaby, although our organization does operate across this beautiful province. So in the interests of getting straight to it, I'm going to hand us over to Shaunna and to Shanice.
Thank you, Emma. Very excited to be part of this last in a series for the season. And I hope if you haven't already checked out some of the previous webinars from previous years that you go and give them a listen as well, because we have some really pertinent topics that I think could also help prepare your teams for heading into provincials. As Emma mentioned, I'm excited to be here. Been partnering with Volleyball BC for several years now. I was the past chair of the Canadian Sports Psychology Association, and I'm currently adjunct faculty in the High Performance Coaching and Technical Leadership program at UBC. So very passionate about coaches. And Shanice, I'm going to say it, like, you were in that program. I mean, like, come on, we gotta just, this is like team effort here. Shanice was one of the amazing coaches that was in the High Performance Coaching and Technical Leadership program. So really excited that she's not just here in the context as a coach, she's also here as a former high performance volleyball athlete, and also one of our mental health ambassadors that's been a huge part of the success of this program in having more understanding of how important mental performance and mental health is in the sports sector and in your beautiful sport of volleyball. So Shanice is here to represent our ambassador team here tonight. And so we will be going to Shanice now and again to contribute her amazing experience and thoughts as we go through our topics for the evening. And I did take a look at all of the responses that you sent in. There were many that were very interesting questions of what you were looking to find out a little bit more about. So we've amalgamated and incorporated as many as we can into the webinar. And they kind of fit into some global themes that you'll see here on the screen right now. So the first one being, how do we build a sense of more balanced perspective building when we head into major competitions like a provincial championship? So perspective building is the first theme. The second theme is kind of the middle two that are joined together. So both self-regulation skills of how you can teach your athletes to better manage their emotions, their physical response and nervous system responses, and even their way of thinking, as well as how can you get them to do that regulation, but together. So with another teammate, or having the team co-regulate as a group, and building resiliency, for example, when some of those really challenging, unhelpful thoughts or challenging emotions creep in. And then lastly, how can we help to encourage our athletes to balance their identity, because they're going to have very high athletic identities. They identify in this volleyball context as being a competitor and a teammate, but making sure that they know that there's so much more to them than just being an athlete. And so we'll get to that point. That will be sort of our last and final theme of the evening. But this is where we're going to go. But let me just say that it would be great to hear from you all along the way. If you have any questions as we're going along and it occurs to you, please let us know and just put it in the chat box, and we'll do our best to answer questions on demand too. So if you've heard any of my webinars before, you know that I always start when I can. If we're going to talk about anxiety, we're going to talk about mental skills, I really think we have to take care with the language that we use. So I don't just have an umbrella statement of, I'm trying to build mental toughness necessarily. I don't have a problem with saying we want to build mental toughness, but I always like to balance it with other language, because this language can be very off-putting and can really shut down certain conversations in the mental health space if we use words like, tough all the time. Because of course, it denotes that, well, there must be an opposite side to tough, must mean that I'm mentally weak, when in fact, the language I want to start encouraging us to use, if we're talking about the mental state or emotional platform, is that we're trying to increase athletes' understanding that we can have all kinds of thoughts and emotions, right? We just need to have more flexibility. So to accept that there'll be times where we're feeling more anxiety than others, and that we're going to move through our emotions with agility. They will pass, and we have skills to help them through that. So I think that's a big part of our job. It's not just teaching them technical and tactical skills or physical development. It's teaching them some of these mental and emotional awareness as well. To start, I won't go as deep into this as I did in our first version of performance anxiety from 2023. I think it was maybe fall 2023 we did it, Emma. I don't recall. It was something like that, little over a year and a half ago. So just to start, making sure that they understand and you understand what anxiety is, and that it's actually, it's important, I think, that we have this psychoeducation when we're teaching these skills, so we can normalize this idea of having some jitters, being a bit nervous, right? It's your brain preparing you for something that's going to be challenging. Our brains are there to help protect us and to detect threats and to help us rise to the occasion. That's where the fight and flight kicks in, right? It gives us all kinds of power, or it gives us speed, or it gives us the ability to shut down or to freeze. But the impacts of anxiety can be very negative and can be very overwhelming, especially for young athletes that don't have the skills to manage it. So getting them to understand a certain amount of uneasiness and those kind of difficult side of anxiety is actually just letting you know that, this matters to you. And that's okay. Your body's going through a bit of a transformation. You've got mounting adrenaline now, right? We're going to be more alert now and more aware when we have a little bit of anxiety. But it's when we go beyond a little bit into too much, that's when things can get overwhelming. And so you're going to be coaching squads that have a wide range of personality types and abilities to manage, and grit and resilience will vary amongst the different players on your teams. So we're going to start with this idea of, how do we help athletes who put too much pressure on themselves to not implode in or outside of competition? And this is a direct quote from one of you. One of you sent it in. So I don't know if you're one of the people that's logged on live tonight, or someone maybe who's watching it recorded later, but hopefully we're going to help a little bit by giving you some strategies to talk about this high stakes moments and to normalize that behavior, but also give them some tools to manage it. So first thing I say, anyone who's worked with me before, you name it to tame it, right? Let them know that it's okay to feel some nerves. It's okay to have those jitters and feel that heightened sense of worry, maybe even some of the pressure. But it's also our job as the coach to help provide a balance point where we can balance out some of that pressure and get them to feel that sense of perspective. I would argue it's also their parents need to be part of that too. And sometimes even as a coach, it ends up being your job to balance it for the parents too. So good luck with having to be the counterpoint of all people, all things. And I'll be working with officials in another separate webinar as well, because officials play a really important role in helping to regulate some of the nerves that show up, right? So building that perspective is a big one. So I'm going to start with a bit of a storytelling that I like to do when I'm in my private practice. Maybe I'm working individually with athletes, or I'm working with a team in a team intervention. And I like to use storytelling or parables or examples from in and outside of sport to drive home ideas like perspective. So this is a really great story. Some also call it the Chinese farmer or the Taoist farmer. And I modify it and try to make it applicable to the sport context. So the underlying meaning behind it is that it isn't so much about, what happens to us. That's about 10%. That's a small percentage, really, that holds the nugget of learning. It's the 90% of how we decide to react to those circumstances and how we decide to build perspective on it. So this in the story, usually it involves a horse and a farmer, and the perspectives on getting a horse and losing a horse and the impact of a horse. So instead of, I've translated it into more of a volleyball specific storytelling here. So I call it the good news, bad news, who knows? And so an example would be you're heading into a tournament and you win the pool in the round robin, and everyone's like, woo, good news, getting, over the moon happy with the outcomes, and really only framing it as this is only a good thing. And sometimes athletes get a little too wrapped up, coaches too, parents too, in the outcomes and viewing it as a good news. Well, what if the next day you find out that by far the strongest team in the tournament had shown up and two of their key players were actually missing, and maybe they had some illness and they severely underperformed, and they ended up being the bottom of their pool, and they are in fact who you're going to play in the knockout round, which is, not necessarily great news, right? So it puts that previous win into a different light. And ultimately, really, we want to have a balanced view with either scenario, whether you won or whether you're going to be playing that really high performance team. Good news, bad news, who knows? It's how are we going to face this particular challenge ahead of us? The other example is more individual, where maybe you have, oh no, our top player, our veteran athlete came down with an illness and and doesn't show up. And everybody's thrown for a loop because that's such bad news. But as a result, it means that one of your younger, newer players, maybe they're even newer to the sport, has to step in, and for the first time, maybe in the season, in a really challenging time, ends up with a performance of a lifetime, right? And just having an amazing performance. And yeah, sure, on the surface, that's really good news, right? That you maybe didn't see coming. But ultimately, good news, bad news, who knows? It doesn't mean you don't celebrate, of course, you do. But you make sure to frame things that, okay, that was great, we did well, but let's get ready for the next one, right? Every performance and every play, every moment is its own individual moment. So teaching them that emotional agility and that flexibility and being able to interpret, it's 90% how we react to it that really matters, not just the outcomes. Another perspective builder is just changing one word when we're looking at something that might be going on the team or to a particular athlete. They say, so this keeps happening to me, or this keeps happening to us. If you just shift one word to this is happening for me, this is happening for us, that makes a huge difference. And it's much more growth mindset oriented. And I'll show you a slide in a second where we're going to get into more details about growth mindset. But it really gets the athlete and even you as the coach. Oh, great. And here's Derek. Yay. Okay, that's great. The band's all back together again. Great. So happening for me, not happening to me. So again, it's 90% what's happening for us, right? How are we going to grow from this? What's going to be our strategy? This is actually cool. Bring it at us. Bring it at me. Let's go, right? So having really a challenge mindset instead of seeing everything as a threat or negative, right? So listening, getting them to listen to their self-talk and make sure that that self-talk hopefully is centered around things that they can control, or at least that they're a little bit more aware of, right? So that's another perspective builder. I'm sure that many of you, because volleyball was a very early adopter to this concept of growth mindset, when Carol Dweck, who was an American psychologist, first started introducing her research in the United States in the education system, volleyball, actually Volleyball USA, was one of the first national programs to really embrace this idea of growth mindset. And Volleyball Canada and Volleyball BC were also really early to the table of recognizing what a great idea and how translatable this concept was, where we don't have this really narrow fixed mindset that's very threat oriented and tied to things like someone is naturally talented, right? Or that outcomes count above all. In fact, more focused on things like effort being important, or what you're focusing on in terms of your growth and your learning and your development, that trying to improve and measuring and receiving through feedback is really, really an important element in the growth mindset. So you can go online. There's so many resources if you haven't already tapped into it. There's some really great coaching resources on the language that we can use, exercises that you can do as a team that enhance growth mindset. But if you haven't already gone down that road, to just take a look online and see what's there. And you, even if you look at volleyball specifically, there are many great videos and ways you can incorporate growth mindset concepts into practices and into your language. I also, this slide here is available as part of the toolkit that's on the website in a protected area that's called, I'm sorry, what is it called again?
We have it on the Safety Hub.
Safety.
If you just go to the Volleyball BC website, and then you're going to click on Safety Hub and then Mental Health, and you can see some little snippets of the toolkit. But if anyone is interested in seeing some of the full resources, then there's a contact email on there to get a copy.
Great. Fantastic. Thank you. So some of these resources, so we developed these at the Canadian Centre for Mental Health and Sport, and through Game Plan. We developed these for our national programs, but these are absolutely applicable to every level of sport and athlete development. And so it's just getting your athletes to understand that, you know, when we're going into higher stakes environments and where there's more pressure and there's more ego involved and it really matters to you, it makes sense that you're not always going to be in that comfort zone. It makes sense that you're going to spend a lot more time. It's why it's so big in the middle, right? When we're in competitive sport, we're likely spending a lot of time in this challenge zone. So getting them and you maybe a little more acquainted with what that might look like. You're going to have a little more increased anxiety. You might have some fluctuations in energy, difficulties sleeping even, maybe irritability, and maybe need a little bit more recovery time, things like that. So normalizing that cycle, but knowing that in order to achieve, it's actually quite possible and honestly quite typical that they're going to find themselves in this challenge zone state. Their nervous system is going to be on a higher level of alert, a higher calibration, and normalizing that for them so that they don't see that as necessarily something completely negative. It's a place for them to habituate themselves and get used to the discomfort of being in the challenge zone in a higher performance sport. Another thing I like to bring attention to is coaches being able to reframe this idea of pressure on an athlete. And you're feeling it too, of course, because you're there to help them. The role of the coach is to, I remember Ryan, who was in one of our last webinars representing Volleyball BC, said, your job as a coach is to remove barriers to performance, right? That's really the primary job as a coach, one of many important primary jobs. So reframing pressure and having them recognize that it's there for a very important reason, but that you want to encourage them to find some perspective in that pressure is, I think, another dimension of your job. So you could encourage them, for example, when they're getting really activated in warm up and they're getting very physically and emotionally, maybe even mentally activated, really seeing if you can harness that to that positive energy, and that it's the whole team that's contributing to that positive energy. So instead of just, it's pressure and I'm feeling super, way up here, I'm way too high calibrated. Well, let's see if we can convert some of that into positive energy and just embracing that higher calibration. That's what pressure does, because it matters to you, right? And so it's not necessarily such a bad thing. You can be nervous. You can also be excited at the same time. They are the same thing, ultimately. Also, go over your team's love for the game. Create a list. Maybe do this before you head into provincials. What do you love about volleyball? What's so cool about it? It's a team sport. It's the ultimate team sport, right? There's cool gear. You get to travel. I love the sound of the smack of the ball, my hand on the ball, but also the sound a point makes when the ball smacks the ground. There's just so many beautiful little nuanced. You're never going to know when you pose that question, what are you going to get? It could even be, oh, I have cool laces. Like it can be just the most random thing, especially when you're talking to really younger athletes. You'd never even know, wow, that's what they love about it. Okay, cool. Right. So build the list, see how long you can make the list. Right. How do they perceive a love of competing too? So not just playing, and just kind of going through the motions. Could we instill a love of competing, like being able to put all that we've learned in practice into a competition? And make it not just about whether we're winning or losing, but are we competing? How are we going to compete? So does that mean our sportspersonship? Does that mean our communication style? Does that mean our effort? Right? How are we going to define that, how we show up as competitors? Right? And then what are those life lessons? I'm sure these are things that you're already weaving through absolutely, every time you're interacting with them, that you're not just teaching them sport skills. They're learning so much more, but do they know that? Right? So maybe drawing some of those lessons out of your athletes so that they can be more present in them and recognize how many skills they have that they've been gaining from this beautiful sport that they'll be able to apply outside of the field of play, right? Which will contribute to their holistic personal identity, right? So just a few ideas. And then even just reframing the pathway that they're on. So building more perspective in terms of when do I give them the opportunity to really reflect on what's going on? Okay. Do they have a training journal, for example? Maybe you could get a journal as they head into provincial so they could capture their memories, right? This is how we're going to remember where we were at. Not everybody's going to commit to it the same way. Not everybody is a big journal person, but at least if you provide it or you suggest it, or maybe you give some time to reflect in it, some of them may really pick it up. And it can be a great way for them to get their feelings out and to draw lessons out of every experience. Another one, I'm sure you already do this, but just in case you haven't sort of formalized it or thought about how this could look at provincials, having a group debrief or sort of after all the action, doing your meetings once the emotions have settled, maybe back at the hotel or whenever you feel that it's appropriate, but just talking through that growth mindset piece. What did we learn? How did we grow? So yes, you're going to be, of course, teaching and talking about the tactics and preparing for the next competition, but also pulling out the lessons are really key. So that's a great way to build perspective too. And then make sure that you are getting them to set some personal goals in addition to the team goals, which I'll talk about in a second, that are process and performance related and not related to outcomes. So things that they can set on their own or with your help, so they can gain other things out of the tournament and not just results, right? This is where, when I was speaking earlier about competing, so developing a love for competing, because not every athlete loves to compete. That's just a fact. Some athletes love the training part. They love the camaraderie. They love the practicing and the mastering of skills, but they get really freaked out once they're put to the test against someone else. It's just not their thing. And I think it can be such a beautiful thing when we show them that competition doesn't all have to feel like pure adversary. It can also, what's cool about your sport is you're all on one side of the net, right? Like you all get to compete sort of together in this protected but amazing united force, like a wall, right? It's such a unique sport to build teamwork, and a good place to test it is in competition. So getting them to understand, I think it's a great way to build confidence as well. Just your sport has so many growth opportunities in it, and learning to compete is one of them. And also understanding that yes, it's great to have the outcomes, but being able to have them focus on things that they can actually control. You might want to use some kind of a goal setting exercise before you head into those provincial matches on their own, so that they can set some daily, what are some things that I'm going to show up doing every day that I know that I can execute on, that will be a little more in my control, right? That's process goals. The performance ones are the things like their particular role. Can they embrace their particular role and what they want to set for themselves as performance markers? So I'm going to communicate in a certain way, or I'm going to practice a particular service of mine. I'm going to see if I can improve as the performance goes on, right? So it's performance goals that are related to themselves, not others. So comparing themselves to themselves. So process and performance, this can be some really great places to kind of balance out that perspective that it's not all just about outcomes, right? It's about how much we're going to grow. And I know that Derek and Shanice have some really great ideas on ways, whether it was while they were playing or ways that they're currently executing these ideas, Derek in his counseling practice and Shanice in her coaching practice. If you want to share some of those great ideas about perspective building, whoever would like to start.
I'll start this time. Yeah, I'm trying to remember what I shared in the previous one, so let's see if I can get some of those pieces. But I think one of the things that comes up around pressure for me and is sort of like that. What do I make of it? You might say. What's my reaction to pressure? What's my feelings about the feeling of pressure and the experience of it? And I think for a lot of the times as an athlete myself, I would have a very like negative reaction to pressure, meaning like I truly really tried to push it away and I kind of felt like I couldn't have it. It was this thing where it was like, oh no, like pressure, like it's this anxiety, it's this thing that tells me to shut down. And I found when I went into that kind of shutdown mode, like it would really close me off as a person, and just like that made it so hard for me to actually be open to my experience, to feel confident that like kind of comes with that posture of openness to experience. So I think one of the things I learned over time, and especially now in the work that I do, is really learning how to say yes to pressure, say yes to it in the sense that like not necessarily you have to like it or you have to like love pressure, but that it's something we can notice and be like more okay with, where it's like, oh yeah, like I'm noticing some of the feelings coming up around that. I'm noticing like, yeah, when I'm on the service line, some like a little bit of tightness in my shoulders or my stomach. There's some movement there, and it's sort of one just like naming it so I can know that it's happening, and then two, seeing if I can almost just like remind myself of why it's there. That perspective flip of like, oh, this pressure is here for a good reason. This pressure is here because this is an opportunity to help my team, and it's a cool moment to go out and do that. And so I think like, that idea of also embedding that in a broader narrative can be really helpful, right? This idea that like, pressure is something I've been through before. Maybe for your athletes, reminding them of like, think about a time when you've really been through, the mud and the muck, and you rose through that challenge and that adversity and the pressures that kind of came with that. And can you bring some of that with you? Maybe even as a coach, I'm thinking about how do you remind the team? Like, can you remember a time like early on in the season we were down, 13-11 in the final set, and we found a way to claw back, and like there's something about that of like that can be very exciting to embody that and to remind our athletes of that. So those are one thing that comes to mind. I guess like another piece too from the coach's end is like, what's your reaction to pressure as a coach? Like, how do you respond to it? Do you tend to get kind of worked up? And because your reaction to pressure, your athletes will be looking to that as well. Like if you're freaking out and you're kind of like, hey, everybody, like they're going to feel some of that. So as much as I think we also want our athletes to manage pressure well, I think we also have to be mindful of, what some of our reactions to it too. So again, even the things I'm saying, like, can you navigate that? And I think this is like, if anybody who's ever played volleyball and now is coaching, it's this whole other world of like, I can't like control the game. I have to like sit on the sidelines, and I have to trust my players, and that can be really hard too. So I think just noticing that pressure that comes with that, and sort of seeing your role. What's my role in their journey? I think is a bit of that too, which I know as a former athlete, that was always hard as a coach to kind of be supportive on the sidelines and not just want to jump on the court and hit the ball. Yeah. So
that's a great segue, Derek, to Shanice, because she is now living that now, right? So maybe she can offer also some insight on that idea, because yeah, it's an interesting perspective when you shift hats.
Mhm. Yeah, it's been an interesting experience to navigate. Um, I'm definitely changing my answer to this question based on the last one we just did, and gonna speak maybe more from the coaching perspective. Um, I think we started this conversation with a talk, and that question was about how do I prevent my athletes from imploding or something kind of along those lines. And I think maybe that's the wrong question to ask in a way, because from my perspective, imploding is part of the process. And I think imploding is inevitable at some point in time. Think we have to remember, even the athletes that I coach at the youth sport level, like we're dealing with kids in a way, we're dealing with young adults, we're dealing with people who are developing and trying to figure it out. And it's really easy for me to be like coaching a game and be like, ah, man, why can't this person do this in my head? Or like, ah, this is so easy. Or why is so and so falling apart? Um, but it's not about me. This is their experience. This is their journey to kind of figure it out. And if they don't have those moments of imploding or those moments of losing or those moments of succumbing to pressure and succumbing to difficult competition, then how are they ever going to get better? I think one thing I tell my athletes all the time is that winning is incredibly hard. And I'm someone that won a lot in my career at the youth sports level. I won a lot in the club level as well, and I won a lot professionally. And it was very, very difficult the entire way. And even though I won, the last game at the end of the season, everything that led up to that was a lot of losses. I think throughout my whole career, I went one season where we had a perfect season and we didn't lose any games. Otherwise, we had seasons where we lost multiple games, where we were maybe the lower seed, where, I had multiple poor performances myself. I think the losses and the pressure is inevitable, but I think a lot of this conversation needs to be on how do you react as a coach? How do you handle those losses? How do you handle that implosion for your athletes? Are you snapping at them after games? Are you yelling at them? Are you pointing out all the things that are wrong? As a young woman growing up in the sports system, I know that if that would have happened to me as a young athlete, I probably would have quit really early. I probably wouldn't have developed the same way that that led to my trajectory here. So I think a lot of this needs to be maybe reframing that question of like, how do I need to react as a coach, and how can I maybe view this more as a problem that needs to be solved? And if I view it that way, then I'm just working on what's the solution and recognizing that imploding is going to happen probably a lot, especially if you're coaching young kids. Even at my level, coaching young women, it happens a lot. How do I solve that problem? Okay, it happened this weekend on a game. Okay, maybe next weekend it will be better. No, same thing. Okay, maybe next weekend it will be better. How can I solve those problems, and how can I help my athlete get to where they want to go? So at the end of the day, everyone wants to perform well. Everyone wants to win in some capacity, I'm sure. Um, but we got to make sure that we're focusing on this is a problem that needs solving, and I'm the person that has to help the athlete get there because they're relying on me, and it's not about me and maybe my past experiences.
Thank you so much. That is so awesome and such a great layer to bring to this. And it's kind of that, that same good news, bad news, who knows? Like what kind of news are you going to make it? Because if you make it bad news, right? And if you only view it as bad news because your athlete has struggled, that's how they'll start labeling themselves, right?
Mhm.
How we react as the coaches and the parents and the leaders they're watching us, right? They're watching us and they're learning from us and our reactions. I love that. Thank you, Shanice. That was a really great perspective. And so I guess that kind of takes us into a bit of a segue into, so our reaction, right, of how we see when they are struggling, as they're going to struggle, they're going to, right? And we are going to lose. We're going to lose. We're going to lose lots of points and we're going to lose lots of competitions, right? How can we help them to manage their emotions and thoughts? You'll see that I don't have control on here because you can't really control everything. You just need to help them to manage them, right? The idea is that it's a journey. It's about flexibility. It's not all toughness. It's about flexibility. So how do we use things like mindfulness and mind-body techniques to help athletes become more aware of themselves, maybe a little less self-critical and a little more curious, a little less judgment, a little more curiosity, right? And how do we do that as coaches? So a few different techniques or ideas. If you do have some athletes that might get sort of stuck in some behavior loops or some motion loops or some kind of error loops, you can get them to practice different techniques to help them get a little less stuck in that moment. And so these are just a few unsticking techniques. Some are physical, some are cognitive. The first one, I've got a visual cue here of, I don't know if you can see how big I'll be on your video, but I'm actually making a rock, scissors, paper cutting symbol. And so this was from hand signals that I've used in working with sports that are big on the hand signals, like softball and baseball, where there's a lot of nonverbal communication with hand signals. And so one of them I did was like cutting slack. Okay, let's cut some slack. Or it's my way of saying like, let's just loosen up a little. Let's loosen up a little. Okay, that happened. That point, that whatever it was happened. And so let's see if we can just let that happen and pass. And you cut yourself a little bit of slack, be a little more gentle with yourself, and then maybe follow that up with, there's got to be some rehearsal there. So maybe use the bottom technique, which is you take a breath, right? So cut yourself some slack and take a breath and see if that can help. Because we can't change the fact that, yeah, the mistakes are going to happen, right? Stuff's going to happen. But how are we going to get back into a present-centered mindset and start thinking about building on the next play, right? So helping them build a bit of a ritual or some different habits to manage feeling stuck. I won't get into a ton of detail on the co-regulation where you have more than one athlete regulating with each other. So not necessarily on their own, because I've got a whole slide that's dedicated to that, and we'll talk about that in a minute. Or it could be something verbal or some self-talk inside that they use as their place to redirect their energy instead of chastising themselves, maybe just letting it go. So that's one that taken from one of my athletes. That's their phrase that they say, I'm going to let it go. Because like it happened. And it happens to everyone. Now I'm going to let it go. So how are they going to let it go? Some of them might say that internally, and then they will also, I always think it's a great idea to take a breath and incorporate some oxygen into the equation. It's never really a bad idea. And then maybe have something physical, get themselves reconnected with their body again. So it could just be a couple little slaps. In combat sport, they do a lot of slapping, a lot of jumping, a lot of moving around. And I know in volleyball, it's the same. So every athlete's unique, and you might have your own unique history with how you managed your error management afterwards, and just reframing it, whatever that's going to look like. So you could try some of these physical, some are cognitive, and some are sort of mind-body techniques to do that. On a more cognitive level, if you have athletes that you've heard them even saying out loud, the self-talk that falls into certain categories again and again and again. Oh, that was so bad. Or, I'm going to keep doing that again and again. Or I can't do this, like take me out. Like even I've seen that quite a bit where some athletes will they get so upset, they're asking for substitution, right? And they've just lost maybe faith in themselves. So getting them to understand that the self-talk, those really automatic thoughts, they're there for a reason, right? They're there to protect us. They're there to assess threats. They're there to protect our ego, but they might be able to try and exercise like filing those thoughts if we can get them to be more aware of them. So these are some of the more common folders when I have an athlete. Okay, what folder is that going to go in? Okay, we're not saying that again. What folder is that going into? So a lot of times it falls into their making predictions for the future. I'm going to do this again, or they're comparing themselves with someone else, or they're doubting their skills, or they're regretting a tactic that they picked or something else that's in the past and they've got to let go. So your athletes can come up with their own categories, and maybe they have a training journal or you've got a reflection journal saying, are there certain messages that you're more prone to saying? And are there ways that we could file some of those? And then where will we put our thoughts? If we file those away, what will we say instead? Right? And I'm hoping Shanice will remember what she said in our last webinar about her self-talk, and her coach is really great. Yeah, because it was a really great lived example of your coach teaching you early on the importance of self-talk when they heard you on the court. So I'm going to let you give that example later when we go to that. Other ways that some athletes, if they're really getting into some tough self-talk loops, using a silly voice, especially for the younger athletes, this can be a really potent tool for them to recognize that they're just thoughts. They're not magical predictions. They're not even necessarily facts. They're just thoughts to protect them. They're thoughts to help them sort things through. Some of them are not as helpful as others. So if they're not a super helpful thought, can we just use a goofy voice and realize, draw attention to how goofy it is, right? And maybe we'll not be so stuck on it and believing it as much if we give it a little bit of a comical bend to it. This won't be appropriate for every type of negative self-talk, but this can definitely assist, or rather unhelpful self-talk. This can really assist in creating a little bit of distance between the meaning behind that thought and the idea that it's actually just a thought. It's not a fact, and it doesn't have to happen again, but it might, and that's okay too, right? So there's goofy voice. And then there's just teaching the very basic but important skill of box breathing. Doesn't have to be 4 seconds. It could be 3 seconds. It could be a 1 breath relaxation of 1 deep breath in for 2 to 3 seconds and then out. But this is a very popular and quite easy to follow breathing technique. As you can see here, there's a diagram. You can look it up online. You can encourage your athletes to use this whenever there's timeout, whenever there's a break in play, maybe just before they're stepping onto the court, or you're going from dressing room to the floor. And if someone in particular really needs that moment to just tune in with themselves and be gentle with themselves for a moment, doing some box breathing can really be beneficial. And earlier I alluded to this idea of co-regulation, and I love this picture. It is the classic. It just kind of sums up your sport in one image, right? It's 2 players here united. I have no idea what just happened. They seem to be celebrating, but either way, they're doing it together, right? So it could be high fives where you're like, well done, or it could be a fist pump, or it could be, the low five and coming together, even if you lost the point. Doesn't matter. That's what I love about your sport. You come together even when you lose points. It's amazing. Like, it's the ultimate co-regulation. That's the best parking, is when, yeah, something didn't go according to plan, but that's okay. We all win the points together and we lose the points together. You're never really alone in volleyball, whether it's beach or indoors on a court, right? So team cheer is another great way. Co-regulate together. So you have to raise your activation level. You cheer together, right? You take a deep breath as a team, not just alone. You could do this as a team or as the squad on court or during a timeout, whenever you felt that that was appropriate. And also you can signal and encourage your team to reach out to one another when they recognize that they might need to do some of that almost nonverbal co-regulation just by making eye contact or just by making a glance to one another. Look, I'm with you. I see you. You got this, right? You could say it. You could verbally have them say it to one another, or it could just be in the eyes, something really quick, or a hand gesture, right? But it's the beautiful thing about your sport. Make sure you maximize the co-regulation effect of your amazing team sport, because it is honestly, it's the superpower in volleyball, is the fact that it really builds team, your sport, and that you're not alone. So can't stress that enough, as well as this idea of taking a moment whenever this is the right time. So sometimes it's between, getting dressed, maybe you have access to the dressing room and you're just taking that time, get your team to be in there. Maybe a captain or leadership core could lead some moments of just taking a second to think about what they want to be doing. Some of them will visualize, not all of them will be visualizers, but some might be. The rest could just be going over some self-talk, right? Or just taking a moment, doing some box breathing. But start to encourage this idea of self-awareness early so that they're able to normalize this idea. And then later in life, when pressure hits or they have to be able to get through tough things in life, they've got this whole menu of skills that they've learned from your amazing sport, right? So these are life skills, really. They're not just sport skills. But I know our ambassadors have some really great examples. And I know Shanice already bugged you that I want you to talk about your self-talk, and that your coach had such a great way of making you aware of it. Maybe if you want to start, and then Derek can go afterwards.
Yeah. Yeah, sure. Yeah, so I'm really lucky that I had a lot of great coaches throughout my time, but my first volleyball coach really instilled some great habits that have lasted until this day. Um, and it was all about self-talk and self-regulation and being able to look more so to the future rather than staying in the past, and how you're navigating errors. And so whenever we would be in practice, and even in a game, if he ever heard anyone say sorry or say my bad or just say something that was maybe a little bit more negative, wherever he was in the gym, he would kind of call it out. And we all knew that we had to self-correct. And so the language that we had to use was, I'll do better next time, or I got the next one, something that was a little bit more positively reframed, and a little bit more focused on what's to come next rather than focusing on what we just did. And so as I became an adult, it really helped me navigate errors to a place where they were something that was okay for me. I could make, 10 passing errors in a row, and I would still say to myself, I got the next one. Even if it like maybe didn't feel like it at that moment, I think it was just an extra level of reassurance that helped me, stay in it when it could be very easily to crumble or maybe succumb to pressure or stress in a different way. Um, so yeah, I try to do that now a little bit when I'm coaching, and try to point out, if I hear any of the athletes self-talk is going into a negative way, let's try and change that. Let's try to use something a little bit more positive. So that's the biggest one that impacted me in so many ways, in how I played, in how I coached. And it was really, really simple. At the time, I hated it. Yeah, what is this guy on about? Why do I have to say I got the next one? But it worked wonders for me. So yeah.
Awesome. Thank you so much for sharing that again. I just thought it was too important to let it go, especially since the crew watching this one is other coaches. So thank you for sharing that. Derek, what do you think? What were some things to highlight?
Yeah, I think that I'm sort of rejigging my answer a little bit in my head from a coach's point of view. And I think the thing I'm sort of sitting with a little bit is this idea of thinking back to where we get like ideas of like how should we coach. I feel like so much of that is based on how we were coached, and depending on how you were coached, that can potentially have some interesting approaches. There can be some stuff in there that maybe you really liked, and some stuff that you kind of actually didn't feel was actually that helpful as an athlete. And I think from that perspective of now being in the coach's position, and thinking about what was it like when I was an athlete, when I was really stressed, or when I was really dysregulated, when I was really under the pressure of it all. What helped me back then? What were the things that I noticed kind of caused me to shut down, caused me to feel like I kind of pulled inward more? What was the stuff that I remember coaches doing that just like opened me up a little bit, invited me into the space, made me feel like I felt really connected and supported, and so that there's not doesn't feel like there's necessarily like a broad answer, but maybe for those listening, thinking back on some of your experiences of like what were the coaches that really like pulled you out more, like it just felt like sort of like Shanice's coach, like coaches that who like challenged you, but also in a very caring way. I think there's such an important role as a coach to challenge, but also to bring in that care. And so I don't know, hopefully, all of you out there have had experiences of a coach like that. And if you haven't, if you've only had the coach that was really hard on you, thinking, well, is that what I want to pass down? What kind of coach would I want to be? For what coach would I wish I had? And can then I bring some of that to the court when I'm bringing it with these athletes? So that's kind of what my mind thinks of this, and I hope that in there's some ideas relating to how you might want to encourage and talk to them and engage with them, and what sort of things you want to be reminding them. And I imagine in there'd be more care, more compassion, more kindness, more support, rather than just criticism and critique and always seeing what's going wrong. There's probably a little bit more catching them being good rather than all the times they're messing up.
Thank you so much, Derek. That is so important. And I want to go back and add that to the other webinar now. But
Yeah.
that's okay. We'll get the message through somehow. But it was a
Yeah.
really important one for the coaches. I love that. Thank you. Thank you to you. And thanks again, Shanice, for your great example from your own lived experience, and your great coach. So awesome perspectives. And so that sort of leads us to the third and final theme for tonight's webinar, which is taking a look at the athlete's identity and seeing if we can have a hand as we head into provincials and you head into the close of the year and the pressure is mounting, or who knows what kind of season you've been having so far. Each athlete is going to feel differently about it, but their identity of who they are as a person, but particularly how they identify as an athlete, has a huge impact on that. It is you as their coach, right? And helping them to balance that. So this slide just shows an example of, it's an example from golf, actually, from a player. He's a professional player, Scotty Scheffler in the US, and heading into the Masters tournament, his first Masters. And I really like it because he decided to go public with this and let people know that at the professional level and all through his career, this was the thing that he'd been carrying with him, was this really deep identification as an athlete. And golf is everything. It's the only thing. And all this pressure is huge. And it was actually his newlywed bride who met with him before he went to the Masters and said, we got to find a way to reframe this for you, because this is too much. What you're putting on yourself and everything as you, the golfer, you're so much more than that. And you have so much more than that in your life backing you up and supporting you. So this cue card was the actual card that he wrote to himself with his wife's input before the Masters tournament, where he talked about, winning or how he does in this tournament. Sure, it'll change his life on the golf course, but it won't change all the things that he has off the course and all the qualities that he has, the family around him and the support. And knowing that allows him to take that huge weight off his shoulders and just play free, because he's got a whole other side to his life that's still going to be there, whether he wins the Masters or he doesn't. And so how do we make sure we translate that for the developing athletes so they recognize not all the eggs are in the volleyball basket all the time? Because some of them are going to identify highly with that athlete identity. They're very competitive, they're very driven, which is all amazing. But they all likely also are members of a family. They might have some friends that are important to them. Some are on the team, some are out of the team. Maybe there are other aspects to their personal life or skills or different hobbies and talents that they have. They have a pet that is really important to them. maybe they're academically inclined or they're musical, who knows? But encouraging them to explore those things and to remember that they have those other things, because sport may not be everything. And especially we know that it won't be everything forever. It can't last forever. So how do we make sure that we develop that sense of balance with them? Also, how do we make sure that they balance their identity as, well, I'm only important when I'm winning, right? Or things are only good if we're winning, or we have how we measure success through outcomes. How do they let some of those errors, or how do they let a performance that they really felt was very troublesome and challenging to them, how do they find a way to move forward? So this can be a very finite skill that you can do on the court, on the actual court, or it can be after a performance or something, some aspect to a performance that they want to let go. So it's a bit of a variation on the folder idea that I brought up on those sticky thoughts. And this one is just, dumping a thought that's unhelpful and it doesn't serve me anymore. I'm so caught in this loop, chastising myself about it, or getting so sucked into worrying about all those errors that I made last game. I can't seem to live in the moment and enjoy this time with my team. So maybe I need to just dump it. It's time to dump it. So some athletes like to get creative and like see a big garbage can and just like, I'm dumping this one. It's just not worth it right now. Going for the growth mindset. There'll be elements of it that I will file, that I will learn from, that will be part of my skill acquisition and part of that whole journey of learning to lose, because that is really important too. Sure, some of that gets filed, but what needs to be dumped so that they can move forward? So I guess creating a bit more awareness that they actually have a little bit more, autonomy and some ability to manage some of those thoughts and feelings than they thought they did, helping them through those moments of dysregulation. The last one I'm going to mention before I hand it over also to our ambassadors is an idea of forming not just, I know many of you choose captains and assistant captains, and you might have a performance-related leadership core, but it could be that you may want to also have another core of a different type of athlete, or maybe you have them migrating back and forth between the two groups, where you've got a group that is your balance group. And we actually have this on one of the professional teams that I work with right now, the Vancouver Rise, which is our first professional soccer team in Vancouver in the new National or Northern Soccer League. And it's really exciting for us because it's an opportunity to do things differently, because it's a brand new league. It's a brand new league for women and across the gender spectrum. We have 9 non-binary athletes in our league as well, which is really amazing. And so we've got a balance group. So sure, we've got a group that does performance, and then we have a group that's charged with keeping up some social stuff and making sure the sense of humor is present and just doing check-ins with the team and creating exactly that kind of that balance to the whole athlete experience. So it could be that some of you already know who some of those athletes are on the team. They just need to be anointed, and maybe given that role, like really value that role. Like it's so important, because not just the quote unquote high performers are the most important players on the team. Everybody is important, but honoring this type of skill set is really important too. So that's just another idea drawing from another team that I'm working with at the moment. But I know that Derek and Shanice have some great ideas around enhancing a more balanced identity, or when that identity might sometimes get a bit wobbly. And I don't know who wants to start, but just as some final contributions for the night.
I can start here.
Great.
I think what came to mind was, I think it's in Carol Dweck's book, around growth mindset. She talks about some of the research that they like drew some of the stuff from, of like, how do you cultivate it? And it's sort of like, what's encouraged for like students, what are we focusing on the outcomes? Or are we focusing on the process? And I think as like coaches, it's like sort of thinking about, well, what are we identifying as what really matters? And if the thing we're continuously pushing is performance, outcomes, outcomes. That's going to start to feel like the identity of the team. That all we are as a team is we have to win, and if we don't win, we've failed or something like that. And I think that I use this language of like a performance-based identity versus like a purpose-based identity. And when we get so caught up, and this relates to individually, but I think also to a team, is like our team identity all about the performance, or is there something we're really trying to identify as part of our purpose, the things that we really want to bring in? And so I think from a coaching perspective, it's a little bit about what do we want to reward in a sense, or what do we really want to like notice as a coach, and what are we trying to instill as like, yeah, is it the outcomes, or is it the effort, is it the resilience, is it the supporting, whatever your team is kind of like identifying as like kind of core values and things that you really want to be there. I think for again, I think this plays into both individual and team, but just like finding some helpful ways to really notice like what are we highlighting is what really matters, and are we getting pulled into the wins or the losses, or are we getting more tied to the process, you might say. I pulled this book out because I don't know if anybody's read it before, but it's called The First Rule of Mastery by Michael Gervais. He's a sports psychologist. It's a really good book. The first rule of mastery is stop caring what other people think about you. It's a great book, but he talks about this idea of the performance versus purpose-based identity. It's a really good book. So I'd highly recommend it because I think it speaks to some of this stuff too around identity really well.
That's awesome. Thank you for that, Derek. Yeah, we have to start some kind of a book club here for the coaches too. I think that's what we need to do, Emma.
Yeah.
We got to add like our book recommendations on that hub too. Okay, good idea, Derek. Okay, well, we'll start with that one to kick things off. That and Carol Dweck's mindset. We'll do that too. Yeah, awesome. Thanks. Do you have anything to add, Shanice?
Like yes and no. I guess kind of two things. I'll share what I sort of shared with the athletes, just talking about navigating sport identity. So I was one of those athletes growing up who was 120,000% into volleyball, and nothing really else mattered. Some things did, but I was volleyball through and through, and I had a dream of going to the Olympics, and I was on track to kind of do that throughout my career, had a lot of success, and then had a really bad injury that required surgery that left me kind of scrambling of who was I without my sport. And this was at a time when our sport program was transitioning, so I didn't actually have any teammates. I didn't have a coach to support me even. So I was really navigating this on my own, and so it caused a lot of turmoil. And the reason that I just kind of share that is reflecting on one of the moments that I had pretty early on in my coaching career with a young athlete, where I was kind of able to reflect on that experience and maybe be a supportive person for her through something. So a few years ago, I had the opportunity to coach with our youth national team. And we were kind of divided up into 3 different programs. So I was an assistant coach at the time, and we were having essentially like performance reviews with the athletes before we were heading into our competition. And one of the athletes on our team, she suffered a big injury that she couldn't play the tournament at the end of this big training camp, something that she had worked hard for all summer, something that she was like so excited about. And here we are sitting in this room having this performance review with her when she can't do anything. So I kind of stopped the conversation and realized that it wasn't about volleyball anymore. It was about her as a human being. And I just took a moment to ask how she was doing. How are you? How are you feeling about everything? Are you okay? And I think, caring about her in that way allowed her to handle that situation maybe better than if I wouldn't have said anything at all. Granted, I won't know because that didn't happen, but I think it gave her an opportunity to share how she was feeling in a trusted and safe environment. that maybe made it easier for her to handle the loss of what wasn't to be for her in that situation. And I could only do that as a coach because I had gone through it as an athlete and I didn't have anyone in that situation to help me through that. So I think just, for coaches with your young athletes, just show them that you care, learn about them as humans. What are the things that they enjoy doing outside of sport? Ask them questions about their day. I think any opportunity you can take to get to know them better beyond the volleyball court will only make you better as a coach moving forward, will only build your connection with your athletes. And when poop hits the fan in a game, I think it makes it easier for an athlete to trust you and rely on you and to have confidence in those pressure moments or in those big moments because you've allowed for this relationship to build in a natural way.
That's awesome. Geez, we should have had Shanice also in the injury one, Emma, in our injury webinar. I know. Shaunna, stop regretting. Put it in the file. Okay.
Next time.
Next time. But thank you so much. Thanks for that. Yeah, honestly, it's the strength in the relationship building is just so key, right? As a coach, those are the things I remember are the really great relationships that I have with my coaches, and just the skills too, but also just the feeling like they cared about me. That was so huge. That's a great reminder. Thank you. So tonight, who knows? Hopefully there were more than 2 intentions of ideas of ways to shift perspective on your team, but also some concrete action, some coaching action for you, but also things that you can encourage your athletes to do in terms of actual behavior change, and how some of that can be taken from tonight's lessons. Once again, thank you so much to Shanice and Derek for all the great insight and lived experience and all kinds of amazing ideas that I hope the coaches can gain from tonight. I don't know, Emma, if we have anything we want to add, or you think we missed any of the questions, because I know some were submitted before.
Yes, they were, but I had a quick look through, and I think, honestly, I think you guys have covered such a lot of, like, especially around the mindset piece and resetting when things aren't going your way. That was definitely one of the top themes in the questions that we saw. So no, I don't think we've got anything, and I don't see anything else in the chat. So on that note, I would like to thank the 3 of you for being here this evening and giving us such a great insight and a rethink about how we're going to set ourselves up to head into the next 3 weekends of provincials. And I'd like to finish really by just wishing all of the coaches best of luck as they head to TradeX, or they head to the Richmond Oval, and we look forward to seeing you there. Copies of this recording will be on our YouTube channel, and we will email it out as well, along with any slides or handouts that Shaunna wants to give. But thank you, everyone. Have a great evening.
Thank you.
Bye.